So we're going to be talking for about the next 25 to 30 minutes about NASA and no U.S. space flights and their concern about that. A 5-year period basically from 2010 to 2015. The number is 202-737-0001 for Republicans, 202-737-0002 for Democrats, and 202-628-0205 for Independents. Our first call comes from Warren, Michigan, on our line for Republicans. Good morning.
Good morning. I think NASA should go ahead and send up more spaceships to some of these other planets to check out the environment there, like on Mars, to find out why global warming is happening there. Could it be because the sun's harder and affecting us the same way? I think that they should send out more stuff out into space to find out if the temperatures are rising in other places besides our country too, and NASA could do that very easily. Thank you.
Thank you. In this item that we have from the Associated Press, NASA Administrator Michael Griffin recently told lawmakers that China's ambitious space program could feasibly beat the United States in the race back to the moon, although he and outside experts say there's no indication yet that China is on that path. The gap, the flight gap, could also contribute to a loss of interest in space exploration by the U.S. public and Congress, and that could diminish the resources allotted to the space agency. This is according to W. Henry Lambright, a political science professor at Syracuse University. Our next call comes from Fairfield, California, on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, basically the conversations that you've had this morning lead up to the fact that, I know it sounds kind of strange, but since we are talking about space, I'm wondering if our society is going to make it through these warlike tendencies that we have. I don't think that we're inherently warlike, but I think that some of our leaders and some of our corporations, whatever, lead us in that direction. And some of the history that we're taught in school, like a whole educational system in history, is taught by these benchmarks of war. And then they'll talk about something else, and we have war, then we have war, then we have war. We're like programmed for this war type thing.
What does that have to do with the gap in spaceflight?
Well, I'm thinking that how are we gonna get there? I mean, are we going to get into space and pollute the planet like we do here? Are we going to get into space and start having wars out there? I mean, I think we have to get to a certain point on this planet as a species before we start getting out into space.
Buffalo, New York, on our line for Independence. Good morning.
You know, it saddens me to hear any kind of scientific debate on C-SPAN or any other program for that matter, because there's such a profound ignorance of science across the United States. It reminds me of the dumbbell kids that Jay Leno interviews on television and who don't know who Lincoln in Washington was. You know, to have a debate about manned space flights versus unmanned or global warming, and have a man sit on your panel and say, what global warming? I don't see any global warming. I mean, you can get away with that only with an ignorant society. With a society where people understand science, you can't get away with that. So you can virtually come on your program and say anything about the science, and it can't be refuted by the vast population. It's very sad.
Well, sir, let me ask you this. Regarding the space flight gap and in terms of public policy, is this something that maybe Congress should look to fund more, that the President should move up on his list of initiatives or his list of priorities?
If this President cannot recognize global warming, how in the world is he going to recognize the value of space flight, except as a weapon, as somebody pointed out? I just don't think he has the intelligence to any foresight whatsoever to see the value of space flight. I'm not sure myself whether manned versus unmanned is the way to go. I think probably unmanned. I think that's what the debate should be. But I'm not surprised that this President, puts science on the back burner.
Thanks for your call. Next up is San Jose, California, on our line for Republicans. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, I heard a lot of, good conversation, but, a lot of people don't understand that we do have qualified people in there that know where we are globally. We're going into a planetary shift, And I think there may be some uncertainty, or maybe the public doesn't exactly know what the people that are in. We have astrophysicists and stuff that know basically where our planet's going to be, and I think that maybe it's not a good time to put our tax dollars into an area where it's not necessary, or it'd be a waste of money. I think that, yeah, okay, it'd be great. I hear a lot of people wanting to save their jobs. Yeah, okay, let's just put money here. Space industry, yeah, it creates a lot of jobs, but we're all right if we become energy responsible individually. All right, we can take care of our greenhouse problems and all these kind of problems within ourselves. But as far as space exploration and these type of things go, this has already been mapped out. We have people that know about this, but we're not sharing it with the public, and it's all about tax dollars. We need to become smaller in a way that we're more responsible on an individual basis.
More from the article from, excuse me, the article from the Associated Press regarding the space flight gap. NASA had hoped to have the first manned Orion flight as early as 2012. That would be a low-orbit test flight, but that goal was pushed back to 2014 when NASA had to raid the Orion Development Fund to fill in a $3 billion shortfall for finishing space station construction and ending the shuttle program. Repairs to NASA's buildings damaged by Hurricane Katrina also siphoned off money. Space agency officials said that the 2007 budget would remove more than $500 million from what NASA had budgeted for developing the new spacecraft, pushing the first manned flight of Orion back to March 2015. A moon landing is scheduled for no later than 2020. Back to the phones, Chicago, Illinois, on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. I've been watching the space program as I've grown up alongside, and this is all very disturbing to me because nobody recognizes that all the spin-off technology that's resulted from the invention and development of technology through the way computers, communication, all this is a result of our past space program and certain to be the result of more space program, and a gap of this sort is very discouraging to the fan club of the space program. We cannot let our country get in a position where we let engineers give up these jobs, go into other fields because there's no future for them, and suddenly we might be entering a period of collective forgetfulness as a nation.
So what would you suggest to hold the attention of, as you call it, the fan club of space during that 5-year period?
I think we have to stay in space. We have to. We can't.
So would you extend the shuttle program? Would you try and do that until the Orion program was up and running?
I would try to extend the shuttle program, maintain it. Maybe I just don't know. I mean, this is way beyond one individual, myself. But I'm just concerned that we're going to make it difficult for people who want to be engineers to have career possibilities. They may not go into that field. We may lose our technological edge, and forget how to do the things we once did.
Let me ask you this: with all the advancements that we're making in robotics and different forms of technology, why is it so important for man to fly in space?
You know what? It's not as important as it used to be, but that's how you could bring back the vision of the possibility of space and what's out there. The robot can't bring that possibility back. He can perform experiments and do projects, map out terrain, compile data. But for the imagination of man to be sparked, you have to have men creating the discourse of space.
Thanks for your call. We're going to leave it there. Nashville, Tennessee, on our line for Independence. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, I believe honestly, with all the problems here on Earth, I think that the extended space travel is a waste of time. I think that other than a Hubble-type telescope, I think is needed, and the ability to get satellites in space. And if you need weightlessness, you need to get up there and do some experiments that way. I think it's maybe money well spent, but other than that, I think it's a waste of money.
In the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning, this story being reported by the Associated Press, Karzai says he held Taliban peace sessions. A spokesman for the militants denied efforts to quell an Afghan insurgency. President Hamid Karzai acknowledged for the first time yesterday that he had met with Taliban militants in attempts to bring peace to Afghanistan, which is struggling to quell a rising insurgency. Karzai's assertion, immediately rejected as false by a Taliban spokesman, came as a suicide car bomber killed 4 people and wounded 4 others in Kabul, and militants overran a district in the volatile southeast. Also in the news this morning, in the New York Times, this is by David Sanger, money shift could clear way to shut North Korea reactor. The United States said Friday that it had found a way to return frozen money to North Korea, leaving the North only a week to meet the deadline for disabling its main nuclear facility. The announcement seemed to remove the major impediment to North Korea's cooperation under an agreement that calls for the North to shut down its main reactor, its main nuclear facility. The Bush administration said the solution applied to legal and technical problems that prevented the return of $25 million frozen during the investigation of a Macau bank. A delegation of senior Treasury Department officials left Beijing on Friday after 13 days of talks over how to return money, including what the United States said were proceeds from the sale of illicit weapons and other illegal activities held in accounts in a tiny Macau bank, also known as Banco Delta Asia. Among the accounts, American and intelligence officials said were some that President Kim Jong-il and other leaders used to buy the loyalty of the North Korean elite. Back to our phones in Kimberton, Pennsylvania, on our line for Republicans. Tell us about your concerns for no U.S. space flights during the upcoming decade. Yep, got to press the button. Kimberton.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Can
can.
you hear me?
I can hear you now.
All right. I agree with the previous caller that the space program at this point in our history is a waste of time, and all the technology and the spin-offs they tell me about that are gained from that research could be done by the scientists in their little laboratory instead of having this huge complex and we're throwing billions of dollars away. There's absolutely nothing out there for us at all, unless they show me some way to go a lot further than we've been able to go. What is the sense? They've already been there several times and they haven't brought back anything except rocks. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of domestic things that need to be done in our country. There's a lot of problems in our country due to this administration, that's for sure. So I would rather see the money funneled into the domestic programs, and especially the heat is on the handicapped people, the retired people that are on a fixed income. They're just pricing everybody out. If you're not a big business or wealthy already, you're going south in this administration.
Gary, Indiana, on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN.
Thank you for calling.
Your point earlier about robotic spaceflight makes a lot more sense financially, but I think that if you come down to the truth of the matter, unless NASA can find a way to outsource everything to KBR and Halliburton, and the profit margin expands like it did for this ridiculous war, you're not going to get the spending on spaceflight that probably some people would like. I think the infrastructure is the problem. We need more spending on infrastructure. One of the reasons that SUVs became so popular back in the mid to late 80s was the ridiculous condition of our roads and bridges, at least up here in the north. And we need schools that need repairing. We need roads fixed. We have to start fixing our country. Thank you.
Thanks for your call. A couple of different looks at a global warming report that was released yesterday by the United Nations. The lead item in this morning's Baltimore Sun, a grim outlook on world climate. Drought, famine are projected as planet warms. Global warming report issued yesterday by the United Nations paints a near apocalyptic version of Earth's future. More than 1 billion people in need of water, extreme food shortages in Africa, a landscape ravaged by floods, and millions of species sentenced to extinction. It was also reported as the lead item in this morning's New York Times with the headline, "Scientists Detail Climate Changes Poles to Tropics." They write, in its most detailed portrait of the effects of climate change driven by human activities, the panel predicted widening droughts in southern Europe and the Middle East, sub-Saharan Africa, the American Southwest, and Mexico, and flooding that could imperil low-lying islands and the crowded river deltas of southern Asia. It stressed that many of the regions facing the greatest risks were among the world's poorest. And this is how it is being reported in this morning's Financial Times. The headline, "Urgent Call to Adapt to Climate Change." They write, climate change could lead to 50 million people becoming refugees as soon as 2010. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said adapting to climate change would cost at least 5 to 10% of gross domestic product in Africa. Actions to help poor countries adapt to higher temperatures, rising sea levels, and an increase in storms, droughts, and floods could help reduce the number of climate change refugees whose migration from the worst affected areas is expected to become a source of serious conflicts within a few decades. We're also discussing this morning no space flights between 2010 and 2015. Our next call comes from Louisville, Kentucky on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. In my opinion, I'm not too worried about that no spaceflight gap as far as our federal government spending goes. And then I think that the whole space program, as far as federal budget goes, is sort of like a horse and buggy technology that needs to be ended until we can make Earth sustainable for living. I think it's ridiculous to go into space whatsoever unless we have a technology built and invented that can make Earth totally sustainable for the indefinite future. And I think it makes no sense to go into space again until we can do that.
Thanks for your call. Virginia Beach, Virginia on our line for Republicans. Good morning.
Yes, good morning to you. Thank you for C-SPAN. I just wanted to give a comment to that fellow that just called in and also the other folks that are thinking about space. You need to be inspired as to what the future is going to hold for us. There is a proposal kicking around NASA that's in competition with other proposals that would allow us to enter space for the purpose of actual terraforming the planet Venus, which is one runaway greenhouse gas effect. The way they would do that was to be moved large chunks of ice to the planet Venus. One of those chunks of ice could be the dismantling of the planet Pluto, which is nothing but one big chunk of ice. We need to continue to run that space shuttle so we get the experience and train our astronauts so that they can do this. One of the reasons we're going to go to the moon is to be able to survey interstellar space and, of course, the interplanetary space to inventory the asteroids that may come to harm us. Also, some of these asteroids may be big enough and contain enough ice to move into the planet Venus and start an actual experiment to be able to reform and recolonize, perhaps colonize Venus in the distant future.
Thanks for your call. In the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning, U.S. quietly upgrades the way war dead are transported home. This is by Bill Poovey of the Associated Press, and he writes, in an about-face by the U.S. government 4 years into the war in Iraq, America's fallen troops are being brought back to their families aboard charter jets instead of ordinary commercial flights, and the caskets are being met by honor guards in white gloves instead of baggage handlers with forklifts. That change, which took effect quietly in January and applies to members of the U.S. military killed in Afghanistan too, came after a campaign waged by a father who was aghast to learn that his son's body was going to be unloaded like so much luggage. John Hawley said an airline executive told him that was the most expeditious way to get the body home. I said, this is Hawley speaking, That's not going to happen with my son. That's not how my son is coming home, said Hawley, an Army veteran from San Diego, whose son, Specialist Matthew Hawley, was killed by a roadside bomb in Iraq in 2005. If it was expeditious to deliver them in garbage trucks, would you do that? More than 3,500 Americans have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Before the new law was passed by Congress, the dead arriving from overseas at the military mortuary in Dover, Delaware, were then typically transferred to a commercial flight to an airport nearest their families. Some were met by smartly uniformed military guards, but in other cases, the flag-draped caskets were unceremoniously taken off the plane by ordinary ground crew members and handed over to the family at a warehouse in a cargo area. Now, the military is flying the dead into smaller regional airports closer to their hometowns so they can be met by families and, in some cases, receive community tributes. The caskets are being borne from the plane by an honor guard. Last call for, or actually next call for this segment comes from Richmond, California. Go ahead.
Good morning, Rob. Good morning, C-SPAN. You know, I couldn't agree, Rob, more with the caller from Pennsylvania, and I think Indiana. You know, I've never understood why we're going up there. I mean, all the money that's dumped in there. But I do have two other points quickly, if you allow me to make them.
Quickly.
Yesterday you had a Miss Griffith on from the Fox News Correspondence. She said that soldiers in Iraq were giving out chocolate balls to get the Iraqis on our side. I propose that they give tax cuts instead to the Iraqis. Those seem to be work better here. And for those of you that think that the fighting them over there so they won't come over here, they're already here. Pet food contamination, think about it. Thank you. Have a blessed day.
A story also in the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning regarding bonuses piling up for guard recruiting. This is talking about one Sergeant Dana Klein of the Georgia Army National Guard, a top recruiter. Klein has managed to get 47 recruits over the last 11 months, earning him Georgia's Meritorious Service Medal, and so far the highest bonus paid to anyone through the nationwide Guard Recruiting Assistance Program. Through the program, Guard members are offered a $1,000 bonus for every person they sign up and another $1,000 when the recruit ships out to basic training. The program is credited with bringing in 25,000 Guard members since its launch 15 months ago. And since getting involved in the program, apparently Sergeant Dana Klein has earned close to $94,000 in bonuses. Next up is Millard, Nebraska, on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob. I'm going to jump off of topic and go back to global warming. It's because global warming is a much, much, much bigger problem than NASA's not being able to find anything to do. The gentleman you had on there, Mr. Ebel, he works for the American Enterprise Institute, and they're paid by many, many energy companies. Their funding comes from energy companies as well as other places too, I'm sure. But the point is that he'll say anything for money.
Thank you. We're going to leave it there. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking with Libby George of Congressional Quarterly. She's their social policy reporter, and she's here to talk to us about the student loan industry. We'll be right back.
Here's a look at who's on the Sunday shows. This week, host Senators